MSU med school grad. He's been practicing family medicine in Saginaw's east side for the past 7 years. He married his college sweetheart, who's an elementary teacher turned mother of 6. So that's quite a career change. 5 years ago, he crossed the Tiber from the Presbyterian background, and so Crystal refers to him as the Saginaw Diocese's own Scott Hahn, whose footsteps you seem to have followed, and we're very honored to have him here this evening, so let's welcome Dr. Toby Long.
Scott Hahn. Man, that's a bar to stat, right? It's a very small feat. So, it's a real pleasure to be with this really cool gathering. I walked in and I saw all these full tables on a Sunday night, and I thought, man, this is fantastic. And I have to say that the timing is wonderful, because my wife is home and the kids go to bed. So if you don't mind, I'm going to speak till about 8:30 when they're prompted. Yeah, so lots of questions, to that end, it's Sunday night. You guys have been to church. You've just finished a great meal. There is coffee on your table. That's good. Use it, because I'm going to just tell 3 stories. I like stories. I've been to a lot of theological lectures in my life. I don't love theological lectures. I sometimes do, and sometimes don't. Stories, I think, are a unique way to see and to notice God's fingerprint in somebody's life. I think it's easier to see where God has been and what God's doing when you tell a story. And so I'm going to tell 3 stories, and that's going to be a cakewalk compared to my wife putting the rest to bed. But before I do, I'm going to ask you to join me in prayer, because I'm going to ask the Holy Spirit to come and bless our time together. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Gracious Lord, we invite you to be with us. We thank you for your love, for your ongoing mission in this place. It's very evident. I pray that you would bless our time together, that you would bless this food to everyone's bodies, and that you would draw us together to be closer to one another and closer to you. In Christ's name, amen. Amen. Okay, so first story is 2 nuns and a train to Glasgow. Somebody gave me the advice in undergrad to study abroad, and I don't remember who that was, but it was fantastic advice. So I went over to Scotland for a semester, and like any unmarried man without any kids, I traveled a lot. And I wandered down to London and spent some time, and I had to get back for class, and I grabbed the London train, headed to Glasgow, and then over to where I was studying. I will never forget this train trip. I got on, and it's like a 4.5-hour train trip or something like this. And first half, the trees are going by, everything's happening. I immediately noticed on the train 2 fully habited nuns sitting up and over. And I'm sure all of you guys, or many of you have been on trains, or at least been on like transit in the Northeast or somewhere where, chairs are facing each other, right? And I noticed them right away. And at this point in my life, I didn't know any Catholics. I'd really never crossed paths with any Catholics. I'd seen them in the movies, and they looked just like this. And as a young man, I did my best to... it wasn't that I wasn't trying not to stare at them. I was trying to stare at them without being noticed. I was watching them. And anyhow, along the way, for whatever reason, I don't know why, I pulled out a Bible, like a good Bible-believing Protestant, right? And I started reading the Bible, and at some point I looked up, and one of the sisters was looking right at me. And I won't forget this. She looked at me and she her finger went up. I mean, it was like behind me, and there was nobody behind me that was looking in their direction. So anyway, I went over and I sat down, and I took a seat with them. There's lots I could say, but we had about 3 hours. And it was a wonderful 3 hours. These ladies, not only did they know the scriptures backwards and forwards and up and down, they knew Jesus. And they knew Jesus in a way that hit home for me. They didn't know, in my mind, so let me move back a little. I had never really met Catholics, right? And, I grew up with this terrible stereotype of like, well, maybe there's some Christians in the Catholic Church, right? That's kind of an ironic thought. But I wasn't sure. And so, watching these two nuns, and on the one hand thinking, wow, on the other hand feeling somewhat, in my own immature way, bad for them that they'll never know the true spirit of the faith or something silly like this. Well, I sat down, and it's only a few minutes in, and you realize that these ladies love the Lord. And they talked about the Lord like, it was 3 hours. It wasn't like I was talking the whole time. And we got off the train at the end of the trip, and we're departing, and one of them, her name was Sister Agnes. It was Sister Agnes and Sister Mary Pia, the two. They are Carmelite nuns. With all the gear. And we got off the train, and Sister Agnes looked at me, and she said, young man, we are going to pray for you every day that God permits. And, I'm like, I have nothing to say back to that other than, wow, thank you. And I at that time didn't recognize, I think, the gift that she was giving. Here I am in Midland, Michigan, talking to a bunch of Catholics. It still blows my mind. So from there, these two made a big impression on me, and I kept traveling. I ended up going to the Middle East that summer and spending a month in Israel and Egypt, and I kept thinking about these two sisters that I'd met. And I thought, well, what does a good Presbyterian buy to nun friends? So I was in Jerusalem, and I thought, these like necklace rosary things, right? They would probably like that, I guess. I don't even know what that is, but they're pretty. So I bought 2 rosaries in Jerusalem. And I knew their name and I knew their order, okay? And so I flew back into London, and I had a couple of days before I had to go back to where I was based. So I did a lot of research to find out where their house was, or their convent. I found it. So I made my way via the bus one day to this convent in London, and I remember knocking on the door, and this big woman opens it up, fully habited, looking at me like, who are you and why are you knocking on our door? And I said, my name's Toby, Sister Agnes, Sister Mary Pia here. And she looks at me. She leaves. I'm on the porch, the door's there. She comes back with Sister Agnes, who is bubbling and talking and and next thing you know, I'm being hugged. And she says that Sister Mary Pia is on a silent retreat, but I went and told her you're here and she's coming. So we went back into some room in their convent, and it was odd for me, right? So I got shuffled into this room, and there was like a grate. It was like a fence or something, or almost like a jail, actually. And I went on there, and then there was, shuffling and movement, and then the 2 sisters came on the other side of the grate or fence or whatever. And immediately, Sister Agnes just opens it right up. And we sat and we talked. And I gave them, these 2 rosaries. And they gave me the gift of this. Their sincere, real, obvious love for Jesus. So, my first point tonight, the first story is, be Catholic, okay? and being Catholic, love Jesus. That may sound redundant or overly obvious, but I'm going to say it again. Be Catholic, and being Catholic, love Jesus. Where does that come from? There's a whole world around that sees a very beautiful, complicated, ornate religion. And I think a lot of Protestants, especially, unfortunately, stereotype that. And I have a lot of friends. In fact, I got a call from, I have a lot of pastor buddies in this country because I went to seminary. I got a call from my buddy last night who had a long talk with his wife about the Eucharist and about the church, and he's wrestling with this, and he sits with his wife and he goes, what if it's the pearl of great price? What if this is... And she goes, listen, I've known a lot of Catholics. None of them seemed like Christians. So, what I say to you is you have a gift beyond gifts. We have a gift beyond gifts. And with that gift, be Catholic, and being Catholic, love Jesus. You have no idea the impact or the seeds that will fall out of your life by doing that. Okay. Second story. This is all kind of one story, like three little chunks. So flash forward. I was clearly moved and grateful for the role and the influence of these two sisters. But even with that witness and at that stage of my life, there wasn't any thought or idea that I'd ever be Catholic. I just appreciated that there happened to be some Christians in the Catholic Church. Thank you, God. So I had come back and anyway, I ended up working. I was a high school coach for soccer, and I worked for the Salvation Army, and I was working for a little church. And in the process of that, I realized how complicated life is and how hard it is to find answers in the Bible when people have these really serious, difficult problems. And a year of that led me to go, I should go to seminary. So I shipped off to New Jersey and entered seminary to essentially be a Presbyterian minister. And the thing that I was encouraged for is when you go to seminary, you get all the answers, right? And I was looking forward to that. Finally go to a place where people knew what the Bible was trying to say and what the answers really were. And so I went to Princeton Seminary in New Jersey, and it's a unique seminary. People come from all over the world. There's like 45 different denominations at this seminary, which is fantastic for the huge array of perspective and opinions that you're going to get on Scripture. There's a flip side to that coin, right? There's 500 different answers for every question that's posed. And I quickly learned by the end of my first semester, how difficult it was with every theological issue in question. There was no answers. Okay? And that's okay on one level, but not only was there no answers, there was a whole lot of arguing, and there was a lot of division, and there was a lot of disagreement, and it was fun on one level, but it was difficult on another. And I remember in a seminar that I had at the end of my first year, it's a seminar on the Gospel of St. John, that we were working through it, working the Greek and whatever, and we got to the prayer in John 17, and probably a lot of you are familiar with this. So John 17, right? This is Jesus in the garden. What's about to happen? His betrayal, his passion, okay? And what does Jesus do in the moments before his great passion? He goes to prayer. He goes to pray to the Father. And he prays for his disciples. Who else does he pray for? He prays for all of those who would believe afterward. And I'm sure half of you, 3/4 of you, some of you know what he asked for on our behalf. Does anybody know?
Unity.
Yes, that's right. He prays for unity. That all those who believe would be one. As I am in you and you are in me, may they be one, so that the world may know that you have sent me. It's like a missional unity. It's not just campfire kumbaya unity. It's a unity that bewilders the mind. That the world recognizes there's something like superhuman here, right? I remember reading that, and I remember going, Lord, why isn't there a church that's all over the world that goes all the way back to the time of Christ and that's remained one. I don't understand it. I'd get home and my wife would be like, hey, Toby, you got another letter from the sisters in England. That's true. I got back to the States. Every 6 to 8 weeks for the last 18 years, I've gotten letters from those two sisters. My last one was like 4 weeks ago. They just keep coming. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Anyway, so my thick skull, I mean, I didn't see the writing on the wall. I was frustrated at the time. But I struggled with that passage, right? You know, if love is sort of the chief Christian virtue, I think humility is close behind. We stand before God and we're humans. We don't understand. So in humility, I did begin to recognize this Catholic thing that seemed really big. And if you took all the Catholics in the world, you know, if you took all the non-Catholic Christians in the world, they didn't add up to the number of Catholics. And oh my goodness, they've been around for a long time. And every time I looked in my study guides and tried to come up with an answer, the Catholic Church seemed to have kind of like a good perspective on it. So I had a crisis of career, right? Because, you know, to be a Presbyterian pastor, you have to take ordination exams after your 3 years, which is where you like, black and white, this is what I believe. And I don't know if I believe it anymore. And so I took the MCAT and I thought, well, the closest thing to being a pastor is being a family doctor somewhere where people don't want to be a family doctor. So maybe I'll just do that. So that's what happened. So I finished seminary and we went to med school, Michigan State. It still wasn't thinking of becoming Catholic, but I was stuck kind of intellectually in the house, but spiritually I couldn't see it happening. It didn't make sense. It wasn't for me. My family didn't come from there. My heritage isn't there. For me to become Catholic just would be crazy. Flash forward a few years. I have an opportunity to return to India with a mentor guy, and so I go back to India, and so one thing, I don't know how many of you guys have traveled much, but when you're in a foreign place, something familiar is a gift, okay? Especially if you're alone. So whenever I used to travel, and if it was in Africa or Asia or whatever, I would look for a church, right? Because if nothing else was familiar, there would be the scriptures, or there would be a picture of Jesus, or a cross, or whatever. And I'm going to, a little confession here, you know, you could travel across Africa or Asia, or 9 times out of 10 you stumble upon a church. Guess what? It's Catholic. There's Presbyterian churches everywhere in Scotland, but you wander far from Scotland. So I would see this. So I was in Bombay, or Mumbai now, and there was a little Catholic high school church compound not far from the hospital where I was. So I would sneak over every now and again, and what do you think they had? They had an adoration chapel, right? So I would go over just to read some scripture and to pray. Not, I would come in and not to do homage to the Raiders of the Lost Ark box that was at the front that I didn't really understand. But just to be there with some other people who were praying, right? So anyway, I will not forget this one day I walked into this room and I had this Bible that I have here tonight. And so when I walked in, there was a gentleman who you looked like middle-aged to me, probably the exact same age I am right now. And he looked up at me, he gave me this weird double take. And I thought, well, this was not a touristy area at all, so he's just like, who's this white guy that walked in, or something like this. But it was weird, and he looked at me like, oh, I hope he didn't see that I looked at him, and then he went back, and this weird awkward exchange, and I sat down. He left a couple minutes later, exited. I was there for, 20 minutes or something like this. And I remember getting up, stepping out of the chapel, and when I walked out of, the entrance, this man was standing right there, just waiting. And I thought, oh no, what's going to happen? What does he have, or what does he need, or, obviously super spiritual thoughts that I was having. And And he came up and he spoke he spoke very good English, so, and he was incredibly apologetic. Excuse me, sir, I'm very sorry. I don't mean to have you feel awkward immediately. We're both like hyper awkward. But I woke up this morning. Oh, and sir, this never happens. I don't know why this happened today, but there's all these apologies and back and forth. I'm like, what is it, brother? I woke up this morning and I had the sense that I was to come to the chapel and there was something that I needed to read to someone, and I would just know it was going to happen. And I'm not very a coincidental type of guy. That's not really how I function per se. He obviously didn't function that way either. So we had this back and forth awkward. And he goes, you know what? I'm just going to do it. When I saw you walk in, I figured this is you, and so if you will just bear with me, I'm just going to read you something, and then I will be on my way. So I don't know what he had. I don't know if it was I don't know what he had, but he opened up the book that he had, and he looks at me, and he goes, I ask not only on behalf of these, but also on behalf of those who will believe in me through their word, that they may all be one. As you, Father, are in me, and I am in you, may they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. I and them, you and me, that they may become completely one, so that the world may know that you have sent me and have loved them even as you loved me. He reads that. Yeah, wow, right? And I said, you have no idea what you just said to me. He's like, I have no idea. So, his name is Maxim. I wrote his name down right here. And he left. And you think I'd come home and sign up for RCIA, right? No, I didn't. But I was starting to hear. I was starting to hear on a deeper level. And so, my point to you here, number 2 with this. Don't quench the Spirit. Okay? So, St. Paul writes to the Ephesians and he talks this idea, don't quench the Spirit. What does that mean? God is always at work. Always at work. There's so much, the love of God is always at work to transform and to change and to draw in and to become one. And you have no idea in your family, at your workplace, at your parish, at the grocery store, at some random adoration chapel, what God may be asking you to write, to do, to say. And not as somebody who's followed whatever the Spirit has asked, by all means, no. But Maxim was a guy who did that. And following his lead and looking at the fruit of his faithfulness, I would ask you to think about, pray about, do the same. Don't quench the Spirit. Listen. Okay. Third story, and then we're done. I think we're done. Yeah. Flash forward. What all becomes of all of this? So we lived around the country, and then we ended up coming back to Saginaw. And every time we moved, I'd always ask my wife, hey, you want to become Catholic? You want to become Catholic? Should we go find a Catholic church? And no. No. But I would go to Mass a lot, okay? Oh, thank you very much. Pharmacist knows what's needed. So I would go to Mass a lot. Never take. I just love to go to Mass. It happened early on. And so I would go a lot. And so on one random Thursday, I used to have Thursdays when I could see patients. We lived in Freeland. And so St. Agnes, which I'd never been to, I looked on my little app. Oh, there's a Mass Thursday morning over at St. Agnes. So I went over to the 8 a.m. Mass. Mind you, there's all kinds of interior stuff going on. I'm feeling more and more like I should think about jumping and doing this, but just crazy, right? You're not a Catholic in my family. I had a whole ton of money and time and everything invested into Presbyterian education. Why would I be Catholic? That just doesn't make sense. And I remember walking to this tiny little chapel, and there's like 7 people in there, and the priest gets up the verse for that day came out of John 21. So what happens in this verse? So this is after the Passion, right? Jesus is dead, resurrected, and what does Peter and the disciples do? They're standing around, Peter's like, well, what do we do now? Let's go fishing. That's what happens, really. This is the passages. So they go out, and they spend all night fishing. And what did they catch? Nada. They didn't catch it. And in the morning, they're looking out from the boat, and there's a guy on the shore. And this guy on the shore says, hey, throw your nets over to the other side. Which I imagine, to some professional, whatever, fisherman, probably was like, who do you think you are? We've been fishing all night. You don't think we know what to do? That's crazy. And the priest went on to talk about the fact that sometimes God asks us to do things that seem crazy. Sometimes we need to cast our lot to the other side. I'm like, okay? He goes, sometimes you must throw caution to the wind and trust God. And I'm in the back, like, trying to sit on my hands. Anyway, the funny part of the story is Mass ended, and I really felt like enough's enough, I need to talk to somebody. So I walked across the hall, and I presumed that the church secretary was at Mass, so I was familiar with this throw caution to the wind phrase, and I walked right up to her and I said, sometimes you just have to throw caution to the wind. She looks right at me. And, you know, if she had one of these red panic buttons. And I quickly saw her face was freaking out. I was like, oh no, I just want to talk to a priest. Which confused her as well, I think. And anyway, she kindly arranged for a follow-up meeting. And yeah. And then we did enter into RCIA. But the point of that third story that I would say for you guys is you think about forming your own families, forming the faith of your own faith and your kids' faith. And you think about the way in which God does that in our lives. Sometimes it doesn't always fit into the calculated algorithm that just seems to make the most sense, okay? It's not that we're required to be crazy or do crazy, but to be open and to be sensitive to what's real, to where the Spirit's headed, and what's faithful. So, sometimes in life, God asks us to do the crazy. I mean, think of Abraham and Isaac. Think of Noah and the ark. Think of David and Goliath. Think of Peter, right? On the boat. Hey, trust me. Hey, get out of the boat. Yeah, now.
Yeah, right.
Storm? Yeah. God's not after like super smart. God's after super faithful. And somehow to ingest that, I think kids see it. They see the reality, and that makes an impact. They see the love or the willingness to make that big leap and a big decision for something that may not make sense, but you wouldn't do it if it wasn't real. And I think they ingest that. On a lighter note, it's like my kids know nothing about football. They don't really care about U of M or Michigan State. Yesterday I'm walking across the house and I hear a TV flip on and my 8-year-old's like, oh yeah, go Michigan State! She doesn't know anything about it, but she ingests somebody else's excitement, doesn't she? So just think about that in our own lives. Are we excited? Are we seeking to be faithful? Are we seeking to do whatever it is that God has for us? So, I think that's
She's
it.
excited.
All right, let me pray, and then, although the kids are still going to be awake. No, I'm just kidding.
Nice try.
All right, let me pray. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. God, I thank you for the work that you're obviously doing here. I thank you for these people who are already following your lead. I pray your blessing on them. I pray for Father Andy that you would use him and bless him, and that this whole group would ingest whatever it is you have for them. Thank you for yourself, and thank you for the gift of this home. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you.